So 2.5 years ago, PLA decided to create a position to connect people with HIV to experimental drugs, and that's what I was hired for. And from this, the program grew into an educational type of program that empowers people with HIV about information about treatment, to help them be an active part in the decision-making process regarding their health care, so that they don't feel left out and their life being in the hands of physicians or whatever. They become proactive, and they know where to look and what to read, and you know how to get experimental drugs.
So you're kind of therapeutic, and you offer them advice, and you help them through the tough times of.
Yeah, it's really an educational process for them, not only about the medical information, but also about the desire and the tools to self-empower. You know.
Well, let's get into some of the drug aspect of all this. First of all, let's talk about who designed AZT, who designed it, and when was it first used?
AZT was designed in the 60s as a drug against cancer, and it was tested and found not to be very effective and to be toxic. So they left it on the shelf for years and years, and then when they were screening drugs against HIV, they found out that AZT and the whole family of drugs behind AZT block an enzyme that is necessary for the virus to infect new cells. So they started using it in patients around 1985. That's when they first put it in people, and then in 1987 it was approved.
So you're telling me they had a bunch of this sitting on the shelf?
Mm-hmm. That's the process of finding drugs. That's always like that people find drugs. They take the germ, the virus, whatever they want to find something against, and they screen millions of substances against them. And that's how they find substances that block the growth of any bacteria or things like that.
Do you think that possibly because they had so much of this stockpile that it was kind of rushed into use?
No, they just you know, they have all these chemicals that they generate all the time, and they screen them against major things.
Well, when was it approved by the FDA?
It was approved in '87. The approval, I mean, you know, it's very well documented that the approval process was rushed for several reasons. The main one being that there was nothing at the time to treat HIV. There was absolutely nothing. So, I mean, the Reagan government definitely helped in, you know, having this drug approved quickly. Then the following drugs after that took much more time to be approved because there was less an emergency. They had one already.
Right. Well, so you feel like maybe it was rushed through. What forced it to be rushed through like that? What?
The emergency. It was an emergency. I mean, people were dying. There was absolutely nothing to stop HIV. They needed something, you know, and so the FDA satisfied itself with less data than they usually request because of the life-threatening condition for people.
Do you think that maybe there should have been more tests done before it was
No, because in people who can tolerate AZT, it really helps. It's not the perfect drug by far, but it helps. And being approved, you know, what's really being approved is all about is that it makes a drug available to a large number of people. Okay, instead of reserving it to the few chosen ones that do clinical trials and stuff like that. So it really made it available, and the insurance companies had to pay for it, and so it was really, you know, expanding the access to the only one at the time that had some promise, however small these promises were.
You had to do something, I suppose.
Mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm.
Well, let's move on and talk about a couple of other drugs that have been compared to AZT, or been said that were a little bit similar. One of them is DDC.
Mm-hmm.
What is that, and when was it?
DDC, I mean, AZT, DDI, DDC are all drugs in the same family of chemicals. So they are all drugs developed for cancer in the 60s and screened against HIV. And DDC was found to have an activity against HIV. And at first they tested it by itself, just giving DDC to people. And what they found out is that it doesn't work very well by itself. It's not very toxic, however its efficacy is limited. So what they've thought about doing is to put AZT and DDC together and see whether two drugs would be better. Because when you use two drugs like two antibiotics, it's very common practice, you can give less of each, so you have less toxicity. But because you give two drugs, if the virus becomes resistant to one drug, the other one will take care of it. So you have less resistance and less toxicity. That's why they always combine drugs together. So they decided to try AZT and DDC together, and they found out that it was better than AZT by itself. So that's why DDC was approved for use with AZT, and for use with AZT only.
And
not
what
by
about
itself.
DDI?
DDI was tested again by itself, and DDI by itself seems to work pretty well. So DDI was approved by itself. However, because they didn't have too much data on people starting with DDI, they had data on people who had tried AZT for a while and then shifted to DDI. They approved DDI only for people who had taken AZT before. But as we accumulate new data right now about people who start their treatment with DDI, I think that DDI is going to be approved for anyone at any time.
Is it approved now?
Now, it's approved for people who have tried AZT before. But, I mean, these approval things are very, it's the book, it's rules. But physicians have a lot of, freedom to change if they want. And if they think that they want to start DDI, it's available in the pharmacy, and people do that. It's like the combination AZT and DDI that is being tested right now and seems very promising. Well, at some point, it's very likely that DDI will be approved for the use with AZT. However, physicians, since the two are available in pharmacies, are already using it.
Well, getting back to the approval process, exactly how has it changed, the FDA approval process since ACE began? Has it changed since the beginning?
Yeah, it changed a lot in two ways. First of all, for life-threatening diseases, the usual way to determine whether the drug was working or not was death. How many, you have the placebo group, you have the drug group, how many die in this group? That was the bottom line. With AIDS, not only it's cruel in general, but with AIDS, the problem is that people develop symptoms and they die a few years down the line. And so you couldn't wait all these years to know whether a drug was working or not. So they started using what are called surrogate markers, which are other things that you can measure that indicate whether a drug is working or not. And the best example are the T cells, the cells that are killed during HIV disease. Well, and people have declining level of T cells. Well, if you give a drug and the T cells go up, you can assume that the drug is helping. So the first thing was to accept this type of measures instead of the death count. The other thing that happened recently, and the text of this new process just came out a few weeks ago, is that they changed the way the whole approval system for drugs for life-threatening disease, be it AIDS, cancer, things like that. They need. So recently they passed new laws that changed the approval process for drugs for life-threatening diseases like AIDS, cancer, and others. And it takes less time. The drug company has to present less evidence of efficacy. Then what is granted is a conditional approval, meaning the drug is put on the market so that people can benefit of it. But when the drug is put on the market, the drug company has to keep doing studies. And then 1 year down the line or 2 years down the line, the FDA will re-examine the drug and grant definitive approval or withdraw the drug from the market. It's a conditional approval, conditional on further studies. And this is very, very, very important for people with HIV, because a lot of people have already tried AZT, DDI, DDC, everything. They have no more options. And as we bring new drug quickly, they can try it. And at the same time, well, I mean, they try it and they will give us the information to know whether the drugs are working. But people who have no other options are willing to take the risk. And
so was this brought about, this change brought about by AIDS in the way AZT and DDI?
Yeah. I mean, that brought the whole frame of mind. Now, what really changed the thing, very interestingly enough, is this Council on Competitiveness that Dan Quayle was heading, and the drug company wanted their drugs on the market, you know, as quickly as possible. And so,
Okay, hang on, please.
Yeah. So because the drug company want their drugs on the market as quickly as possible, they pushed that. So coming from two, I mean, you know, strange bedfellows, coming from two directions, the drug companies wanting their drugs on the market as quickly as possible, and the patients wanting drugs as quickly as possible, this made the reform happen. Because the drug company, as soon as they get the drug on the market, they get profits on the drug, so they can use these profits to finance the further research necessary for
Well, it
approval.
sounds like a great development to come to pass and not too soon. Are there more alternative, other alternative drugs that may be more effective than the three main?
Yeah, there's a new one called D4T that is being tested right now. That seems very promising. There's another one called 3TC. There's a lot of drugs coming up. And hopefully with this new approval process, if they show early signs of efficacy, they will be approved and available, which is really the key word,
Right.
For people with HIV who have exhausted everything else.
Right. Now, Claudia, would you want to talk about D4T?
Yeah, sure.
What exactly?
D40 is another one of these DDI, DDC, AZT, same family. However, it seems to be as efficacious as DDI with the toxicity, the low toxicity of DDC. So far, it's the best ratio effectiveness over toxicity that we have. That's why it makes it a promising drug.
I see. So they just keep refining what they
Yeah.
have. Okay, let's talk about another one, peptide T.
Mhm.
What is that, and what kind of effects does it have? Is it the
Oh.
same family?
No, peptide T was designed by a scientist called Candace Pert 7 years ago, 8 years ago, a long time ago. And her idea is that when the virus binds to the cell, it's going to infect. There's a protein of the virus that binds to the receptor. It's like a key in the lock type of thing. And what she designed is a little peptide, a little molecule that can cover the lock so that the key doesn't get in. It's like gunk in the keyhole, if you want. And so she tried to develop that, and for a lot of political, economical, many reasons, she couldn't put the drug into the research system. Basically, she didn't have the money to do it. No drug company was interested. And finally, it's only after a Swedish team tried peptide T on patients and noticed that people who had neurological symptoms, mainly AIDS-related dementia, were getting better, that studies were started in this country. And right now there's a large study at USC here in Los Angeles where they are trying peptide T specifically on people who have AIDS-related dementia. And it seems to be a very interesting drug for that.
Now, is this a preventative, or is this? It sounds like if you're putting a gap over, say, like you were saying, the key in the lock, that kind of thing. It sounds like it's more. Is it a preventive?
In theory, yeah. In theory, you would want to administer that as soon as possible after infection. Okay. Now, you have to try whether it's worth it or not, because maybe early on there's not enough virus active in the body to really justify a treatment. But in theory, yes. It's something you would want to do, as early as possible.
Right. Could somebody who doesn't have AIDS take peptide T and what is it a protective?
No,
It's not a
no,
protective.
I don't think that. All these drugs, they work like 80%, meaning that they don't block everything. They block 80% of it, or there's always some failure, and that wouldn't protect people. No.
Is it legal? It's not. Is peptide T legal? It's not.
It's Hepatitis is a very interesting situation. You can access it through clinical trials, and this is very legal, or you can access it through the underground. And that's where the underground buyers club, what we call the buyers club,
Okay, let's go ahead and get into that.
the undergrounds. So basically, I mean, the story of the underground was at some point drugs were not available, like DDI, I mean, DDC mainly, a few antibiotics that are useful, peptide T. These drugs were not available anyway. So a few people started smuggling drug in the U.S. and selling them to people with HIV. Then it became a little more official, and the FDA had this law that allows someone, if you have a prescription for a drug that is approved somewhere else in the world, you can order up to 3 months supply of this drug and import it. So what people would do, they would go, in Ireland, for example, for an antibiotic that was very popular at some point, you would go to Ireland where the drug was approved with a prescription for like thousands of people, I mean hundreds of people, and buy all the drugs and import it legally in the States and sell it. So, I mean, it was very underground and the FDA reacted badly at the beginning. And then, because of the need for that and the emergency, the government looked the other way. And right now, there's a very peaceful cohabitation between the few clubs, underground clubs that are left, and the FDA. And the FDA is checking what they're doing, and they are reporting what they're doing to the FDA, and they live in recognition and peace at this point.
Well, I would think the FDA could get some kind of data from some of these underground clubs that
absolutely,
they can use.
absolutely. And also, they'd rather be sure that they are delivering, good chemicals.
I think the microphone picks that up. Okay.
So the FDA would rather see the underground distribute, good quality chemicals rather than, contaminated chemicals. Because if you try to block something from happening, it's going to happen the other way, and you have no control over it. If you're, flexible, then you can control and let it go, and the quality is much better.
Now, have there been, one case scenario is, like you said, they go foreign, they buy a large amount, they bring it back here. Has there been cases of people who came out with treatments here in the United States, just locally?
Yeah, I mean, peptide T was a little bit, although they would buy peptide T in Denmark, the peptide T was developed in the States.
Are there other drugs that are even so experimental that's never been developed?
At this point, not really. At this point, the underground is not selling very much except peptide T and a few antibiotics that are approved in other countries. DDC has been approved. The very popular drugs in the underground have been approved. So there's really nothing that the underground is really,
So DDI and DDC started it underground?
DDC mainly. DDI was available rather quickly. But DDC was available underground for a long, long time. Yeah.
Okay, and you said earlier that there are just a few of these left. Have they dwindled down now?
Yeah, there's probably half a dozen big underground places. I mean, the one in LA closed last May. There was no need for it anymore. So, and now there's a big one in New York that mail orders all over the country. So that's what we use.
What are some of the manufacturers, like say, I don't know, Burroughs Wellcome would be one of them, doing? What are they doing to get drugs to their patients if they have them, even though the FDA has not approved them? In other words, a drug company has some drugs that they feel they've developed, and the FDA has not approved it yet. They have it on this shelf. They feel like maybe we would really like to get this out. It's going to take 2 years for the approval process to go through. Are they going to underground clubs?
No, what they do is they set up what are called expanded access programs. When they have a drug which has shown early signs of efficacy against HIV, they go to the FDA and say, look, we have this, we would like to make it available to people. So that's what happened with D4T a few months ago. they decided that now everyone who has taken AZT and doesn't work anymore, taken DDI doesn't work anymore, and tried everything, can ask them for D40, and they will give that to their physician, and the people will be able to get D40. The drug is free. You cannot sell a drug until it's approved. And also, they collect data from these people. It's like a huge clinical trial all over the country, basically. And this has been, the first time they had that was with DDI, and there was like thousands of people that were on expanded access. Then they did it for DDC, and now they are doing it for D40.
Designed it, and when was it first used?
AZT was designed in the 60s as a drug against cancer, and it was tested and found not to be very effective and to be toxic. So they left it on the shelf for years and years, and then when they were screening drugs against HIV, they found out that AZT and the whole family of drugs behind AZT block with information about treatment to help them be an active part in the decision-making process regarding their health care, so that they don't feel left out and their life being in the hands of physicians or whatever. They become proactive, and they know where to look and what to read, and you know how to get experimental drugs.
So you're kind of therapeutic, and you
an enzyme that is necessary for the virus to infect new cells. So they started using it in patients around 1985. That's when they first put it in people. And then in 1987, it was approved.
So you're telling me they had a bunch of this sitting on the shelf?
That's the process of finding drugs. That's always like that people find drugs. They take the germ, the virus, whatever they want to.
Offer them advice, and you help them through the tough times of...
Yeah, it's really an educational process for them, not only about the medical information, but also about the desire and the tools to self-empower, you know.
Well, let's get into some of the drug aspect of all this. First of all, let's talk about who designed AZT, who
2.5 years ago, APLA decided to create a position to connect people with HIV to experimental drugs, and that's what I was hired for. And from this, the program grew into an educational type of program that empowers people with HIV about information